Chelsea, we're in New York City for a press event for Sony. What do you think they're going to announce?
Everybody's saying it's going to be a full-frame pro-level camera. I was kind of hoping for a camera that would be ideal for sports and wildlife, but their glass that they've been creating doesn't really support that. But maybe they're coming out with glass as well. We don't really know why we're here.
Yeah, like big lenses, big telephotos maybe. I really want like an A99 with E-mount. Like I want an E-mount camera, high megapixels, but I want a big fat grip, big knobby buttons and dials, dual memory cards, just like pro stuff.
Yeah, that would be nice. I liked the A99, but you were limited with glass, right?
Yeah, they just haven't put any energy into the lenses recently. They've been all about E-mount.
Tony and I just got back from the Sony press event and they unveiled the A9, which is a really exciting camera. The specs it's pro. The specs are really impressive, but we want to get our hands on it to see if those specs on paper convey to the real world, if it's as impressive as it looks.
So we shot some with it today, but we couldn't keep the images. Tomorrow, we'll have actual shooting events where we get to spend more time. So subscribe to see the full video, which will probably be out in about a week. We just wanted to get something to you quick to go over our first impressions and
what we know so
the specs.
far. Yeah.
So this is a competitor to the 1DX and the Nikon D5. These like $6,000 cameras that photojournalists and sports photographers mostly use. Some wildlife photographers use them too. And I think speed is the key word. Those cameras come in at, the D5's 12 frames a second, the 1DX is 14 frames a second. The A9 from Sony,
20 frames per second.
Crazy.
It's fast.
With like what seems to be very good autofocus.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing we need to spend more time with, but the little time that we got to spend, it seemed like it was doing a good job tracking.
It also has a silent shutter with no vibration.
And that's a big deal.
Especially for wildlife, weddings, anywhere where you want to take a picture and you don't want that conspicuous shutter sound.
I shot a quiet jazz concert with a D5 and I was so embarrassed because the shutter was click, 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 like everybody in the auditorium could hear it, so a silent shutter is fantastic.
Yeah.
And of course an electronic viewfinder, meaning the viewfinder never blacks out. Normally with a DSLR, the mirror goes up to take a picture, which means you just see flashes of the real world at 14 times a second. But you can get a continuous feed, and it's a pretty amazing experience because you just don't have that interruption.
I'm curious to see what that experience is like because I've never shot with a camera like that before. So I don't even know what that's going to feel like. 24
megapixels is a big step down from the A7R2, and that's going to frustrate some people because people want one camera that has everything, like all the good stuff from every camera put together, and there's never been a camera like that.
No, there's never been a camera like that.
You always make choices. So you're selecting a lower megapixel camera that is faster. You'll end up choosing a camera based on your specific type of purposes, or if you're actually a pro, you'll probably have a primary and a backup body. So maybe the A7R2 will be a backup body and this will be your primary, or vice versa. Stuff we've been asking for forever, they gave it to us, and that's like the great thing about Sony.
The joystick, everyone was really, it sounds so silly, but everyone was really excited about the joystick.
And what else?
People have been asking about it. Dual card slots, a bigger battery, 2.2 times more battery capacity.
Yep,
and that's been
there's
a
vertical
huge
grip where you can put two of those in.
And that's been a huge complaint for people. Everyone, they say that they shoot with Sony and the battery drains too fast, so Sony fixed it. I like how responsive they are and that they actually listen to photographers.
Okay, shutter speed with the electronic shutter is 1/32 thousandths of a second.
Yeah.
And they're using a stacked CMOS sensor, which is letting them read the data from the sensor off much, much faster, which normally if you shoot with an electronic shutter, even with still photos, you can get a rolling shutter, where if somebody's swinging with a golf club, it'll go from straight to being all curvy. It looks just really weird. So you can't use that kind of thing for action in sports. But this, you should be able to use the electronic silent shutter for action in sports. It does have a mechanical shutter, which you shouldn't even need to use most of the time, but it's there if you want to use it to just completely eliminate that last little bit of it. Not having to use a mechanical shutter also helps reduce the amount of vibration that's happening in it. And so it just means you should be able to get sharper images. The focusing system seemed pretty remarkable. It goes right out to the edges. They have 93% coverage of the sensor with the focusing system.
I was excited about that.
Yeah, and 693 points.
693 points.
one nice thing, if you shoot with a D5 or a 1DX, the focusing points are kind of clustered around the middle. If you switch to a D500, they go out to the edges. And once you use that, you feel like you can't go back because it's so useful to be able to compose your subject on the right side and maybe do some rule of thirds or something artistic.
Yeah, the rule of space, give your subject something to move into if you're doing wildlife especially.
Yeah, or it can just track the subject wherever it moves throughout the frame. So if you're using a long telephoto and your subject tends to move around some because you don't have perfectly steady hands, it will keep tracking it because it can see it. Whereas with a 1DX or a D5, it would lose track of it as it moved outside of the focusing system. For the batteries, they're saying 480 shots with the viewfinder or 650 shots with the LCD monitor, but I never find those numbers to be accurate or usable in any way.
For the battery life?
Yeah, but anyway.
One of the pros said that they shot 2,000 shots and had 40% battery left.
Yeah, exactly. See what I mean? That's like not consistent with what they said at all. They're SD cards, but they're the new fast type of SD card. So I think it's not going to be slow like the old SD cards. And it will shoot up to 200 RAW files or 300 JPEG files before it starts to buffer. So buffering shouldn't be an issue. And
It's really fast.
Jordan from the Camera Store TV tested this and said that you can hit the menu button and go into the menus and stuff while it's still buffering. Because unlike
nice.
the A6300, you couldn't do that, and that would end up being really frustrating. What do you think of the electronic viewfinder, Chelsea?
I don't know. I didn't even pay attention. It was like in a whirlwind. I just picked it up and took some shots.
I thought the electronic viewfinder looked good. I like electronic viewfinders more than optical viewfinders. I didn't notice any lag. It seemed totally functional. I didn't have any problems with it.
I didn't notice anything
We'll spend more time with it. I did have a few, of course, there are always a few things missing because we always want some camera that has absolutely everything.
We always nitpick, so let's do it.
Okay.
Why be any different today?
It's supposed to be a sports and photojournalism camera, but they don't really have the big glass that a lot of sports and wildlife photographers will use.
They did unveil a 100 to 400 today, but they don't have long
5.6
primes.
at the long end.
Yeah, 5.6 at the long end.
There's no big fast primes. They don't have like a 200 to 400 fast zoom or a 500 f4 or a 600
They need a
f4.
500 prime.
Yeah, they really do. They just need more of that. So I suspect it's a chicken and egg thing. Like,
Well,
they'll
they
get the
have-
body out, they'll start to get some users in, and then
Yeah.
I'm sure they'll add some more lenses.
They've added some really great glass to their lineup, and
Yeah.
I think that this 100 to 400 is their first step towards longer glass, and I think we'll see it soon.
They've held back the video a little bit. Like, they took out S-Log, which baffled me since that's kind of a software-only feature.
I'm not a video person, so what does that mean? What's the consequence of that?
It means that your video won't be able to have extremes of dynamic range.
Oh, okay.
So you might have to clip the highlights or clip the shadows a little bit. Now, I'm actually not a fan of logs. I know a lot of people use them, but I generally prefer, I find the grading to be too time consuming. So maybe those hybrid shooters who shoot both video and stills won't care about that. I guess they must have determined that it wasn't that big of a deal. But still, it's tough when you see a feature that's been removed.
I think Jordan would say otherwise.
Jordan loves his logs, I think. Mark told us that off camera that the A7R II should have a little bit better dynamic range, and with the 42 megapixel sensor, almost twice as many pixels, it should certainly be able to capture more detail, especially from those super sharp G Master lenses. So you have to make this really tough choice. Do you want the more megapixels, or do you want the faster camera with the double memory cards? And I wish I didn't have to choose between a thumbstick, a reasonable battery, and dual memory cards, or 42 megapixels. That's a painful choice to have to make.
You're always making a choice when you're choosing a camera, though.
I predict we're going to see an A9R and probably an A9S. So they'll have a high megapixel but slower version of this, and then they'll have a video focused version of this.
Probably next week, based on how quickly Sony puts out new cameras.
I know, by the time we have this published. The sync speed is 1/250th. I know, because I also talked with Max Yurov that people care about autofocus while recording video. I didn't find it to be great. I tried autofocusing near and far while recording 4K video, and it hunted around and stuff. It's not as good as like the Canon dual pixel AF cameras. The HDMI out for video recording is a micro HDMI, which we hate. because it falls out if you try to use a field monitor and can
yeah.
just ruin your whole shoot. So you have to then attach some sort of cage to it that will just hold it in there. But like the GH5 has a full HDMI. It has Ethernet for tethering, but that's kind of a weird setup because that's not how things like Capture One typically work. So you can plug in an Ethernet cable. They did this because the D5 and the 1DX have Ethernet.
Are they faster?
Yeah, Ethernet can be very fast, but you have to kind of set up like an FTP server. Like it uses these 1980s internet protocols to transfer files back and forth just because it has this kind of old legacy behind it.
Okay.
The USB is still micro USB, and I'm baffled that they didn't give it a faster like USB-C or USB 3 because that's what we see on the 5DSR and the D810, and that's a staple to us. But we'll try out the Ethernet for tethering and see how it does.
That works.
And I think that about wraps it up. Do you have any final thoughts before we cut to an interview with Mark Weir?
No, I don't. How about you?
No, thank you, Sony. Be sure to subscribe to see the upcoming tests that we're doing, additional experiences. And thank you to Jordan from the Camera Store TV for filming all this. Bye, guys. We're here in New York City with Mark Weir, the Senior Technology Manager for important guy at Sony. He knows everything about the electronic stuff. We have the new Sony A9. It's super exciting. Sony has given us just about everything that we've been asking for. There's like a big, huge battery, which seems to be taped up, but regardless, trust me, I looked at it earlier, it's huge. It's got dual memory cards. It's got a proper thumbstick on the back. Thank you, Mark, for that. Tell us more about the camera, Mark.
Well, the A9 is our next step in the evolution of digital cameras, essentially shifting from mechanically based cameras to cameras that are fully digital that depend on solid-state devices. And what we have in this camera is the first application of our new full-frame stacked CMOS sensor. It's the world's first and the world's only at this time. And what a stacked CMOS sensor does is it uses unique structure of the silicon to be able to dramatically increase the read speed of data. It actually can read out data at 20 times the speed of any other full-frame sensor we've created. This is not new. It's been employed in smartphone and other small sensor applications. 2 years ago, we created our first 1-inch stack sensor. But with stacked CMOS in full frame, we can create a professionally oriented camera that can do things that no other camera can do. Specifically, it can shoot at 20 frames per second at 24 megapixel resolution. It has a focusing system that covers 93% of the sensor area with 693 points, and it can calculate focus at 60 times per second. Also calculate exposure at 60 times per second. But more importantly than just its capture rate and its focus and exposure control, it also can provide a live view through the eye-level viewfinder or LCD that is seamless and blackout free. That means that the camera can capture and provide scene preview almost in parallel, faster than you can detect with your eye. So you are provided with a view of the scene that you're shooting without any interruption at all. And it's hard to imagine it actually happening, but you can now capture the decisive moment, not only at an extraordinarily high frame rate, but you can see the camera capturing the moment because there's no mirror blackout at the time of exposure. It's a seamless, continuous, blackout-free preview of the scene. On top of all of that, you can actually capture silently with no sound from a mechanical mirror or a mechanical shutter, because unlike most any other camera, you can capture at 20 frames per second without the need for a focal plane shutter. And all of this is possible because of the extraordinary read speed of the data from the sensor. We can shoot at incredibly high frame rates with incredible focus accuracy and tracking, with uninterrupted preview of the scene, and silently. And that combination of characteristics really heralds the dawn of a new era in digital imaging, where all of the mechanisms of a traditional camera are now replaced by the performance of solid-state devices.
Yeah, it's amazing. Every time we review a new camera from like Canon or Nikon, I always make a list of the things I wanted to have, and that's things like silent shutter, because I've shot weddings and churches and stuff where you don't want to be disturbing everybody. Quiet jazz concerts. This has that, theirs doesn't. It has that electronic viewfinder, because not only can you see stuff in real time, but you can play back your pictures. In a dark auditorium, you don't have to look at the back screen and light everything up, but you can keep it to your eye. It's just like such a practical and useful camera. I'm really excited to try it out. We're going to be shooting more with it in the coming days, so you'll see images and more hands-on experiences with this, but so far it seems to be great. My experience with the focusing has been really good. I think you're still going to keep the A7S and A7S II as your main video camera. I noticed it doesn't have all the same video features, though it seems like a capable video camera. It does have the 1.5x crop mode from the A7R II, but you said the image quality isn't quite the same for video as you would get out of the A7S, right?
Well, actually, it's really quite a capable video camera. It can shoot 4K video on the full width of the full-frame sensor, which really puts it in a very category of very few cameras, because there are really only a handful that have that capability. You can shoot on the full width of the sensor or a Super 35 crop. It is not a specialized sensor like what we use in the A7R Mark II, so it is not the ultimate high sensitivity, because it is a 24 megapixel sensor, not a 12 megapixel sensor as we use in the A7S Mark II. It's also not the ultimate high resolution sensor that we use in the A7R Mark II at 42 megapixels. This camera is all about speed. The image sensor is designed for the fastest possible readout and the fastest possible still shooting. But again, that has some advantages in video capture as well, and it's a fully capable 4K camera. But it doesn't have the specialization of super high sensitivity of the A7S Mark II.
So there's still a role for every one of your cameras, and I think for a lot of photographers, they might choose maybe an A7R as the backup body, so they can switch between them for different types of scenarios where they might need something high res and then fall back between them if, say, something goes wrong.
Yeah, this camera is really designed as the ultimate high-speed sports and wildlife camera. Obviously, it's fully capable of performing conventional duties as well, but for those photographers who need to capture the decisive moment in high-speed sports, high-speed wildlife, high-speed action, it's equipped like no other for that unique characteristic. We see it as being the ultimate camera for those who are capturing fast, unpredictably moving subjects, for instance. It's really super well suited for that capability. But again, we have different models for different specializations. We think this one will appeal to high-performance sports photographers and agency photographers. For instance, we've included Ethernet and FTP in this camera.
Right, how does that work?
So we have RJ5 connector right here for connection to a LAN, which is typically what you'll find at high-speed sporting events. So it's fully equipped to meet the requirements of a different kind of photographer than what we've catered to before. Again, by leveraging the capability of these new devices, particularly the image sensor. Imagine a camera that can shoot at 20 frames per second and capture well over 200 raw images and well over 300 JPEG images with no interruption of the viewfinder and with a focusing system that really can capture the fastest moving subjects with extraordinarily high hit rate.
And a big old battery and a grip that will take 2 big old batteries. I'm so excited about the bigger batteries, Mark.
Sure. Again, keep in mind this camera, even though it's attached to a very significantly sized lens, this camera is half the size and half the weight of any other camera in its class. High-end professional digital SLRs with very high frame rate and very capable focusing systems are double the size and weight of this camera. So,
and twice the frame rate of them too.
Well,
I'll say it, the 1DX and the D5, it's definitely going to be a killer for those cameras. It's going to be real tough for photographers who invest in those systems because this is looking really good.
Yeah, and again, we're able to do this because we're not bound by the performance of the mechanisms that have held back the performance of that SLRs have been based on for 70 years now. So one of the things that we've done, again, many characteristics of the camera have been significantly advanced from what we've achieved in our A7 series. A9 uses a new battery, which is more than 2 times the capacity of the battery that we use in our A7 series. So this camera can shoot nearly 500 images using its electronic viewfinder, shooting at 20 frames per second from a single charge battery. So battery life has been significantly addressed. Additionally, we have all of the expected capabilities of vertical grip, which can hold 2 batteries to double the battery life even further. Extraordinary connectivity that professional photographers would require out of for assignments that this camera is designed to shoot. So the extensive physical controls that you would require a 4-position joystick on the back for focus point selection directly, an AF on key on the back of the camera, even dedicated dials and switches for focus mode and continuous shooting mode are all included on the new A9. So it's really sort of not just a larger version of an A7 at all, it's really a freshly conceived camera again, designed specifically to meet the requirements of these professional photographers and enthusiasts alike.
Awesome. You guys did it. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Tony.
Kevin, what do you think we're going to see?
Oh boy, this is everybody's put it in the mayonnaise jar thought list, but I'm thinking we're going to see a 60+ megapixel camera, new body design, dual card slots, super fast autofocus, high dynamic range. Take all the things we've seen in the last few cameras and put them in one. Plus, we'll probably see a 16 to 35 G Master lens, and hopefully, somewhere along the line, we'll find a long lens, preferably 100 to 400 zoom G Master.
I was thinking
That would be
long,
awesome.
some long glass too. That's
Long
what
glass.
they're missing in their lineup.
Yep.
But can you imagine how expensive that's going to be?
The G Master lenses are already expensive, but
That's what
they're
I'm
really,
saying.
really nice.
Yeah, they're really